And welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Monday Special. Tonight, as I mentioned earlier, we are focusing on adoption. That's a growing trend in Kenya, where individuals or couples, for one reason or another, have chosen to raise a child not biologically born to them. But in Kenya, there have been many horror stories surrounding adoption, from the theft of children to children adopted legally by foreigners who end up being trafficked. In 2014, Cabinet approved an indefinite moratorium on inter-country adoption of the children in Kenya by foreigners amid concerns that the legal regime was being subverted to traffic children. So what does it take to adopt a child? We want to show you now some facts around adoption. And we want to start with the number of adoptions in Kenya annually. It is estimated that currently there are between 300 to 500 adoptions annually in Kenya. There has been a steady increase in local adoptions from 2013 to date, our source being Change Trust, which works around this area. Now to the adoptive parent. Who can adopt? Well, first, it could be a couple married for at least 3 years, a person married to the child's parent or with the biological parent consenting, a single person who's aged between 25 to 65 years, a relative who has been taking care of the said child. There needs to be a 21-year age gap between the adopting parent and the child. The adoptive parent and child must be resident in Kenya for 6 months prior to their intended adoption, and the applicant should have had continuous care of the child for at least 3 months consecutively prior to adoption. We want to now show you persons who cannot adopt in Kenya. A person who has been found to be mentally ill within the definition of the Mental Health Act, a gay person, an individual convicted of crimes set out in the Children's Act's 3rd schedule, a sole foreign male applicant, and joint applicants who are not married to each other. And finally, let's talk about the adoptive child. Who can actually be adopted? The child needs to be below 18 years and residing in Kenya. It could be an abandoned child where the whereabouts of the parents or guardians are unknown, an orphan who is without a willing guardian or caregiver, in the event where parents or guardians give consent to the adoption of the said child, and a child who requires alternative permanent placement. Well, joining me in studio to discuss this really emotional matter, one that has brought a lot of joy to many families, is to my immediate left, Susan Otoma. She is the CEO of the Little Angels Network, and she'll be telling us about the work that her agency does. To my immediate right is Lynette Guigui, who is an adoptive parent, and next to her, Rose Mbanya, a family lawyer. And ladies, you're all welcome to the program. Lynette, let's start with you. Congratulations. Tell us about your daughter and why did you and your husband choose to adopt?
Okay, thank you, Anne. My daughter is the most beautiful thing I can say that has happened to us. She's 2 years, 3 months right now. She's called Amor. And Amor basically means joy in where I come from. So she is, we decided to adopt a baby after we'd been married for some time, and God had not blessed us with the fruit of the womb.
Right.
Yeah, so we as a family decided to sit and discuss, and we felt that we would give a child a home.
Right.
For we knew there are so many children out there who need the love. They need the care. They needed a family that could show them the love, and we felt that we could be that family as part of the rest of the families who have been also doing the same.
Okay.
So that's what led us to adopt.
At what age did you adopt her?
At 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just a little cub.
Yes.
And so when you laid eyes on her, how did you know that this is meant to be my baby?
Okay, as according to the protocol or the adoptive process, of course, the adoptive agencies identifies the baby through the different homes. And so once the agency that I was working with identified the baby and the child was freed for adoption, and our forms, or the forms that are also required, had been taken to the agency and that approved of them, that we are we can be able to adopt as a couple. Then they matched us with the child, and so they took us to the home where our baby was, and our baby was in Nanyuki. So we traveled all the way. We were expectant like any other parent who's pregnant. So it was exciting, but also a bit scaring, because you don't know what is ahead, because you've not seen the baby. So we traveled, and they showed us the baby. They had educated us to tell us that they will match us with the baby, and we'll look at the baby, and if we feel that that's the baby we want, or we feel attachment or feel something, then that is the baby. But in case that you feel that you don't feel anything, then they can go through the process again. So the first time we went to Nanyuki, then we were shown the baby, of course, through the home. Then when we saw the baby, for sure, I felt something. She was such a beautiful soul, such a humble baby, and she was just quiet somewhere in the corner. And when I held her, I felt I loved the baby. And I didn't have a second thought.
Just like that?
I didn't have a second thought.
That's incredible. Susan, tell us about the work that you do. And in your line of work, do you find that prospective parents are quite specific in terms of the kind of child they are looking to adopt?
So what we do as a child protection organization, we are also licensed as an adoption society. So it's one of the things that we do. So we have other programs away from the adoption program. So for our adoption program, basically we deal with the parents who would like to adopt. Not all of them are infertile. There's a myth around adoptions, and everyone believes that, you know, you adopt because you cannot get your own child. And so we do adoptions for parents families who have their own children. We have adoptions for single families who are not married for one reason or the other, and for couples who would like to expand their families or start their families through adoption. And of course, there are a lot of myths surrounding adoption, and some of the challenges that families face in Kenya really around adoption is issues of stigma. We have a lot of stigma in this country, and people looking at adoptive parents as special groups of people, and adopted children as wayward children who will turn out wayward as they grow up, or they'll have challenges bringing them up. So there's a lot of stigma around adoptions in Kenya that we need to work around.
And so when a parent comes to your agency, are they often very specific in terms of what they are hoping or who they are hoping to find? I mean, are they specific about age, gender, etc.? And what have you found?
Yeah, they have that choice. We say adoption is a choice. Of course, for you to adopt a child, it's a choice that you make. And so as part of the process, they are allowed that choice. So parents come with preferences. For most Kenyan families, there's a preference to a large extent for infants, babies below 1 year. Of course, to adopt, they want to raise a child who will know them as their parents and will grow up as their child. Then there's a high preference for girls, sadly, compared to boys. It's a good thing for the girls and a bad thing for the boys. That there's up to 85% preference for girls than there is for boys.
Any reasons behind that you may know of?
I think social-cultural reasons surrounding marriage, surrounding land and inheritance. You know, in some cultures in Kenya and in Africa, we know that a single girl with a baby girl is highly likely to get married compared to a single man, a single lady with a boy child. Yeah, because the issues around land and inheritance. So I think that's one of the issues that contributes to that. Yeah.
Rose, you're a family lawyer, and we have shown our audience some of those requirements. If you could add to that and tell us what are some of the legal concerns that, you know, parents have when they are starting this process.
I think you actually nailed it in terms of the legal requirements. So with regards to the child, I think maybe just to add that any child to be adopted would have to be at least 6 weeks and older. Some of the challenges that parents have, prospective parents have, are, I think, the myth that they've heard about adoption, and especially the legal process, saying that it's going to take too long, it's going to be too difficult, it might be too expensive, and all of that. I think that's one of the main things that when parents first approach us, that's the first thing. Oh no, how is it? You know, how much is it going to cost? And how long will this be?
And how much does it cost?
what can I say about that? There is no fixed figure as such, but what I can say is that there is a standard amount. It's never the same because each adoption matter will depend on the merits. You know, we've got, well, that's not happening right now, but there were international adoptions.
Right.
There were foreigners living in Kenya. Then there was Kenyans living outside of the country.
Right.
And because of the various, you know, like when an adoption straddles both international, then of course it will be a little bit more costly than a local adoption. Again, you may have the family adoption where I'm adopting the son or daughter of my sister or brother.
Yes.
Charges will differ.
Okay.
But I think it's important to let families who are prospective adopters know that it's not, you know, it's not amounts that they'll be unable to bear. And I think I may speak for a lot of lawyers that do adoption work. We usually will have also a pro bono scheme so that if a family wants to love a child, then they'll not be thrown out just because they can't be able to deal with the fees.
So that is something that one can request of their lawyer? That's
something that one can discuss with their lawyer.
Yes.
Of course, it is good to note that the pro bono schemes should be for those who cannot adopt. So if you can, then it's not good to eat into it, because then you eat into the chance of somebody else who is much more deserving.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit later in terms of the financial evaluations that are made to make sure that, you know, a family can cope. But legally, can this process be reversed at all?
Absolutely not. What happens is this: the adoption process takes certain steps, and if you like, we'll go through them briefly. But once the adoption order has been granted, then it's irrevocable. You can't reverse it.
Okay.
No.
So if somebody shows up at the door 10 years later and says, I am the biological parent of this child?
No. If they appear before the adoption, they can appear anytime during the fostering period, during the legal process, but after the adoption order has been granted, then no, it cannot be revoked.
All right, Susan, I just want to return to you and take us back a little bit. You have heard, even from our intro on this topic, that there have been horror stories around adoption. Just today we have reported about an infant who has been stolen from Kenyatta National Hospital. And not to draw a direct parallel to this incident with what we see largely in terms of, you know, criminal process, but the story goes, a child is stolen, somehow finds their way to this unscrupulous children's home, and then is sold off to would-be parents. So when you come in as an agency, how do you ascertain that the child that you want to place within adoptive care has not been a victim of such a crime?
That's a good question, and it's a valid concern. There are rising cases of lost and found children, some who end up in the children's home and maybe victims of, you know, a process, either child trafficking or a flawed adoption process. And that is a valid concern. We've dealt with cases like that. And that is why the law which we deal with, the Children Act, is the law from which that governs the work that we do. And it's very, very clear which child can be adopted, which child cannot be adopted. It gives the general rules, as you read already. But as adoption societies, we have a duty to go further than that and investigate the backgrounds of each child that is being proposed for adoption. So adoption societies are not children's homes. You know, the roles are very, very separate. So we have children's homes that take care of children, and then we have adoption societies whose role is then to go and investigate the background of each child and ascertain whether that child can be adopted or not.
And what does your own process look like?
So if a child is abandoned, for example, we have three categories of children. We have those that are abandoned. We have those that are given up for adoption by their parents. That's very straightforward. A pregnant mother would come in and for whatever reason sign up their child for adoption. We give them 6 weeks to think through, and after the 6 weeks, they sign the final consent, or they can have their child back. Then we have the abandoned children, which is a tricky case because some of them are left in hospital by their mother. Some of them abandoned out there by the roadside in the garbage pits and places like that. So what happens with those is that the law provides for 6 months for thorough investigations. The police is involved, the chiefs are involved, the local authorities are involved, and the adoption societies are involved. We work with the Department of Children's Services. So we kind of trace back the children's background. So if a mother left a child at Kenyatta Hospital, our role is to go back there, confirm from the records, is there a next of kin? Is there a phone contact? And, you know, go out of our way to contact these people. And I can tell you that we have been able to reunite a number of children with their families. So the purpose of the adoption process, in fact, the first objective is to ensure that children grow up in their original families as much as possible. So the process is not designed to separate children from their biological families. So yes, we do investigate, and where we find parents, then our first objective is to reunite the child. Where we don't, then we provide the 6-month period and ensure that all investigations are done. And after the 6 months, then a child is declared free for adoption.
Okay. Lynette, how much do you know about the biological parents of your now adopted daughter?
From the records and what I was informed from the investigations from the children department, from the home, nobody knows about the background, the history of the mother, but the baby was abandoned the same day she was delivered in the hospital. So for her, the mother delivered and immediately she disappeared and left her in the care of the nurses. So that is how the baby was then taken to the children's home. So that's the much that is known. Yeah, and the name that the mother had given, that is all that is available.
Have you kept the name?
Yes. The name of the mother is there because that is the name that the baby was given in the home. So that name actually was retained because it comes with her birth certificate, came with that name. So she had that name plus an additional name that the home gave her. So her original birth certificate came with that.
Yes.
Yes. Then later on, that name had to be changed after the legal process. When now we got a new birth certificate in our names as the parents.
Yeah. And of course, she's just a wee little baby right now.
Yes.
But have you considered the possibility that one day she may want to know her biological parents, and how do you feel about that?
I think that's a good question, and thank you for that. I think one thing you cannot avoid is a human being trying to get to know their background. Yeah, that is for a fact. And I think we've had even from just not even abandoned children, even in the society, those children that probably were adopted through the other methods, that later on they really want to know who their biological parents are. And that's something I'm cognizant about. And I think even during the period that we are going through the counseling, that's something that came out very clearly, that it will have to come at a certain point. And as adoptive parents, one of our responsibility would also to make sure that our daughter is aware that she is an adopted child. So it's our responsibility as the parents, my husband and myself, to ensure that at the right age, we should be able to disclose for Amor that she is an adopted baby.
Do you have, I know it's very early to ask, but nonetheless, do you have an approximate age when you think it would be appropriate to have that conversation? And, you know, in your own time, has it crossed your mind what you would say?
I wouldn't say it's a specific time because disclosure is a process. It doesn't start, you don't wake up one day and just start the disclosure. And I also believe that disclosure also is age specific. So as parents, the most important thing we need to be is very observant about our daughter so that we can be able to pick at different stages what are the levels of the stages, what can we discuss at those stages, so that we don't just wake up one day and find a total stranger has done the disclosure accidentally. So it's something that we are cognizant as parents, and it's something we are ready at whatever age we feel Amor is becoming having a knowledge of a little of some information that we need to start discussion, then we will start the discussion. But one thing I know, we will not do it as a one-off thing. It will be a process. Yeah.
And how does that make you feel? Because it is so emotional, the whole process. I mean, it's as emotional as anyone having a child, really. But to have to go that step further to say, look, these are the circumstances under which you came to our family. How do you feel about that? Does that make you nervous?
I think normally as a human being, you will feel nervous, but having understood that it is important for us to the process, then it calls, because that is what we need the best for the baby. And having had and also discussed even with other adoptive children or adoptive persons, we understand that it is important for them to be told through their adoptive parents, other than being informed by strangers.
Right.
So in as much as it might be difficult, it might be giving you fear, but it's something we are cognizant that we need to do at the right time.
But the whole parenting process really is about courage, isn't it? Every step of the way. You may be addressing adoption as a big issue, but
the parenting, yes, but it's exciting, because I think when you're prepared for anything, just like any mother who's expectant, I think they have a lot of fears and unknown origin, but every day it's a learning point. So just like you might have even this pregnancy and the other pregnancy, it's very different, and you learn from it every day. So us as a Morse parent, we are also very open to learn from even other parents who've gone through the same, and even learn from the parents who've got their biological child, because raising of a child is the same, whether it's adopted child or biological child, the process is the same.
And we'll talk about that support system and the learning a little bit later. But Rose, if you would take us through the steps now of adoption. I've presented myself to an agency and say I want to take on a child.
Okay.
What happens next?
All right. So what happens is that the preliminary, what we call the preliminary stage, is when the parent will present their application to the adoption society, you know, wishing to adopt a child. There are various things that the adoption society then will look out for. A lot of forms, as our friend told us, they are asked for. You know, they want to see your socials, they want to see your occupation, they want to see your criminal records as well.
Right.
They want to see your financials, they want to know about family and all of that. So a lot of forms are put in, and eventually you're vetted as fit to adopt. The other thing, as Susan had said, is that the registered adoption societies are constantly looking through and investigating the genesis of children or the background of children, so that they can declare them free for adoption. So once parents have been vetted as fit to adopt, then they can be placed with that child who has been declared free for adoption. Okay. Now, when she or he receives, when that family receives the child, then they must stay for a period of 3 months, which is called the fostering period. And it's after the fostering period that they're now ready to go through the legal process. So what the legal process looks like then is, you know, they will present themselves, and we'll obviously take them through, you know, explain to them what to be expected. And I like to say that the legal process takes place in 2 main stages. So the first stage, of course, will be the preparation of the pleadings, and we make sure that all the prerequisites of the law are met. Has the child been declared free, and where is the document that confirms that? Are the parents fit to adopt, and where is the documentation that confirms that? And then there are other intrigues. There's the appointment of the person that we call the guardian ad litem. That's a person who we say acts as the voice of the child during the period of adoption. So that person can either be a friend of the family or a social worker.
Okay.
And the role that they play is to assist the court, especially on the social inquiry. Is the child bonding well? How has the child been received even by the extended family of these parents that have received the child? And that guardian ad litem is expected to write a report. And it's like an appraisal report to the court, either recommending the adoption or even saying that we recommend, but this and this condition.
And so this guardian is not court appointed.
That guardian is court appointed.
Is court appointed.
Is selected by the family, but is court appointed.
Okay.
Yeah. You select or appoint, or you know, you say who you will wish to be the guardian ad litem of your child, but that has to be vetted by the court, and that's what happens at the first hearing.
Okay.
Yeah. So the court will actually interview the person that you have selected to be the guardian ad litem, just to confirm that it's a person who is objective enough, and also who will be able to write a report for the court, so the court can make that particular observation that it needs to make. So after the guardian ad litem has been appointed, there's also the director of children's services, who must also make an evaluation. So it is true that the adoption process has so much scrutiny from so many people, because you see, the adoption society has looked through, the court will be looking through right through the process. There's the guardian ad litem who's appointed, and then there's a children's department that must also do evaluation. So when the guardian ad litem and the children's department have done their evaluations and have made their reports, that's when we can then take the second hearing.
And before we get there, just as you talked about the process, and it does seem like, you know, such great detail, do people fall through the cracks at this point? You know, we hear a lot of families, or prospective families, I should say, raising the concern about how long the process took. What to you is a reasonable period? Yes.
Okay, to answer your first question, yes, people do get very worried or concerned about the length that it will take. The general period that not counting the fostering period, once you're done with that and you want to now do the legal process, 6 months. 6 months should be adequate to complete the work. Of course, that is that also has to take into consideration the breaks that the courts will have, because those also, you know, have a bearing on the time. I think there's usually a recess in April and in December and in August. So if there are those recesses of court, then the court diary may, you know, have to be moved a little forward. But generally speaking, about 6 months should do for that. And what happens again is that once the adoptive parents have received the child for fostering, because sometimes they get very concerned or worried or don't know that how the legal process will be, sometimes you'll find that they stay too long with the children, so that you'll find parents that received children 2012, 2014 are still trying to gather themselves to come for the legal process, but those must be encouraged to really get on and do the legal process, because for as long as you haven't done the legal process, then of course you do not have that irrevocable order. And so anything could happen in between, and it's good, you know, it's good for yourselves and it's good for the child that the process be made neat through the legal adoption process.
Lynette, tell us about at some point they had to scrutinize your financials. What was that process like? What were they looking for exactly, and what did you have to present?
Okay, for me, I think for maybe it's across the other adoption agencies, but for the agency I was working with, one of the documents they had required was a bank statement for both of us, and any document that shows ownership of a property. So any title deed if you have for either the house that you're staying in or any land that you own. So basically those are the two in terms of financial documents that they required. For bank statement and salary for us, because for those who are salaried, then a pay slip as well to accompany the bank statement.
Susan, in terms of financials, what are you looking for? And this is, I suppose, where many people feel adoption is only for people, for the rich, if you like. They are concerned, maybe I do not have any real assets, but I do want to be a parent. I am working. It may not be the best paying job in the world, but so how do you evaluate that and say that this is somebody who's in a position to offer a reasonable or decent life for this child?
And what we look for is the ability to provide for the basic needs of a child. That you're able to feed that child, you're able to clothe the child, you're able to house the child, and you're able to educate the child. That the child will be provided for. So in that sense, what we look at, as you said, you have to provide evidence for that. So documentation, bank statements, pay slips and all that. So it's basically the ability. I'll give an example that we have families living, for example, in the countryside who are basically farmers and maybe small, small-scale business people. And then we have salaried employees in the city who have to pay rent, who have to, use transport to work. Sometimes you do that comparison, and you find that the family in the village who probably has not much money can still take care of a child. So it's not how much you have, it's not how rich you have, it's really your ability to take care of a child. So there's no minimum, really. It's on a case-by-case basis. We look at how much money you have, we look at what other resources are available to provide for them. We look at the social support networks. We have single families, for example, who have very good social support within the family. So the question we ask ourselves as we look at that is, are you able to provide for the needs of a child? Both in the short term and in the long term.
Yes, a fair point. Once orders have been granted, is there any follow-up to, ascertain that this child has indeed ended up in the family or in the setup that, had been, prescribed before? How are you sure that the child remains in safe hands?
Unfortunately not. The process as designed right now, or rather the law, does not provide for the legal adoption follow-up. We have post-placement follow-up.
Okay.
You know, as Ross said, after the assessment, we give you the child, and then you have the 3 months of bonding before you go to court. So during that period, we do monthly visits to check how you're connecting with the child, how the bonding is going, whatever support that you need, we provide. But the law does not allow for the legal adoption follow-up, which I think is a gap that needs to be looked at as we review the laws, because then we have families that have had challenges even after the court order.
Right.
Because the 3 months is a short time to really assess whether, you know, the child fits in or not.
Okay.
Yeah, so currently the law only provides for the 3 months. We go beyond. What we do with the children's home is that we will follow you up until you have gone to court and completed the legal process. After the court order, as Ross said, that becomes your child, like your biological child. We have no business coming to knock your door because this is your child.
Right.
Actually,
if there are cases...
you know, one of the things that has been said to rule against post-adoption orders is the intrusiveness. You know, when you go to the hospital and have your baby and go home, they don't follow you up to then find out how you're taking care of your baby. And the adoption process is a legal birth. So, you know, we generally don't follow you. The law wouldn't want to intrude. It must be that prior to the adoption order, every stricture has been followed to ensure that the child has gone to a safe place. Although, having said all of that, when international adoptions were taking place, that's the only time that the law provided for post-adoption supervision, records and all that. But for locals, there's usually there's usually no requirement, no legal requirement to follow people to their home with the baby that they have legally adopted.
As we wind up, you know, the court work was done, orders granted, here you have your baby. What kind of, just take us through that process. What was it like now having this new member of your family, and what kind of support structures did you have in place, and what do you think needs to be, you know, a prospective parent needs to be thinking about in terms of the support system to, you know, integrate this child throughout the family?
Okay, thanks. I think, okay, for the court process, for my case, I think it took almost 1 year. And basically the lawyer was also trying to explain that it was taking that long because of the breaks, as she had explained. So it took 1 year from the time we finished our bonding to the end of the process. So I think one of the experience that I faced, or the challenges that we faced during that process, is the delays. Of course, the process, when you start the journey, you think it should be faster. Yeah, so I mean, you want to be done with this because you're cognizant that until this is done, for sure this baby is not fully yours. So the faster you do it, the better for you and for the baby as well. Because you imagine you've bonded with this baby, then all of a sudden if somebody was to appear, you'll feel the loss and the baby will feel the loss as well. In as much we know that the biological parent probably is the best. But then there's that anxiety. So in as much as you want the process to move faster, but then there are those delays. So that is a challenge. And I think one of the delays really comes from the children department, because at a certain point, again, you are expected that the children department also need to visit and do a report. So, because I was doing my case in Nairobi, I think one of the challenges we faced even by the time they were calling us for the interview is the shortage of the officers there as they reported. So there are few, and then they are supposed to do all the visits to the parents who are going through this in Nairobi. So it takes a lot of time, and that is an area that probably as a prospective adoptive parent, we need to really see and ensure that how is that process speeded up, so that home visit by the children department is faster, and even the legal process is also faster, so that parents don't get anxious about the whole process.
Right.
Another support that I would expect or would wish is, as Susan had said, you know, adoption is I would call it a bit foreign still for our country. Yes, it's there, but it is still a bit foreign. So most of the people face the stigma, not really the adoptive parents, but even the society itself, the way they treat or they look at the adoptive parent and even the adopted child. So if a lot of advocacy and education could be still done to the public, so that they are aware that adoptive parents need to be treated like any other parent, and adoptive child should also be treated like any other child, and given that support, because we've seen situations whereby even the society calls them, they branded them funny names,
right.
and so even as the child grows up, you will hear some people talking from other quarters.
Right.
Yeah. So if that social support is given through the advocacy, that will be good. Another support that we'll also expect is from the legal process, as she mentioned. Some of the parents, because of the myths, and they believe that adoption is expensive because it has to involve the lawyers. I'm happy she spoke of a process that they are working on.
Pro bono.
Yes, so there are so many parents out there, and I know there are so many babies out there who require families, and probably they are shying off because they think the process is expensive. If they can negotiate a cost that could be better or easier bit for the parents,
right.
then every parent out there who's probably willing to adopt would go through it. And then another thing is about the country or the law. Some of the organizations are good that they will be able to give you leave as a parent, because remember, this is the time you've just received your baby, just like you've given birth to a child.
Right.
You need time for
maternity leave.
Yes, to bond with the baby. But this is not in our country's laws. So some organizations will deny the parents the leave. For some of us, I would want to thank my employer that I was given the leave and I enjoyed that leave for that's like any other maternity. But this is not in the law.
Right.
So one of the wish that I could do is that if this could be worked on, and parents could be given that period to bond with the baby, because you remember there is the home visit. You have to take this baby on a monthly basis to the home and also to the agency, and then you'll also need to be home with this baby to bond. I mean, it's so difficult and time consuming for a parent if you are both working, how to maneuver all this. So this is something that also we wish, or I would wish as a parent, just to support the other parents to ensure that this is made as a process smooth as possible.
All right. We're absolutely out of time, and so I'll give you each 30 seconds for final comments. I'll start with you.
I think what I can say, Anne, is that adoption is a beautiful thing that every Kenyan should consider. If you have space in your house, you have resources in your home, and you can provide for a child. And it's not the only option. We have foster care. It's a lighter version. There are older children who may not benefit from adoption, but still need family care. And so as we say in my organization, you may not change the whole world, but you can change the world for one child. And adoption is one of those ways that you take in a child and change their life forever. There's foster care, there's guardianship, there's many other options that you can consider.
Right.
So consider adoption. I think that's what I would say. Let's consider adoption. These children need families. They really need to grow up in family setups.
Very quickly, what foster care entails?
Foster care is a temporary version of adoption. So basically you take in a child and it's renewed every year. So the permanence that Rose talked about is what lacks in foster care.
Okay.
That is just a temporary way of taking care of a child, providing for them as a parenthood, discipline and all that. But then there's no order. You don't go to court for the legal process that we talked about.
Okay.
And you can renew that every year for up to 18 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
On my part, I think what I would want to say is that the adoption process in Kenya, the legal adoption process, has really been streamlined and is actually quite user-friendly, so that we would encourage parents, more and more parents, to come out and, you know, fulfill the wish to expand families or to care for children through the legal process. It's important, actually, and at this particular time, that as many Kenyans as can do adopt the children, because from the statistics in the children's homes, there are a lot of children that are in need of home, and for some reason, especially the little boys. And so it's important that we do that, and also bearing in mind that there's no international adoption going on, then there is absolute need that people come out and, you know, in their numbers, and we own our children. Societies are best seen by the way that they treat their most vulnerable.
Right.
And so it is important, because these are children that are vulnerable and require families, and the legal process is a friendly one, yeah, as per adoption.
And for you?
I would say adoption is beautiful. I would say adoption is doable, and it is the best thing that can happen to a parent. And I would urge all parents, not just those parents who are not able to have their bio children, to provide a home and love for children. I think we have enough children in this country to be adopted, and the children home is never the best home for the children. So let's give our children an opportunity to live in an environment which is friendly, where they are going to be given love and provided with everything that they require, just like any other person. And then finally, I would want to invite as many parents as possible who probably are out there and are thinking they're alone. As we have formed an adoptive parent network. We have a Facebook page, Adoption is Beautiful Kenya, and you can look for us and join. We also have a WhatsApp group, which we have formed as the adoptive parents. So if there's any adoptive parents out there who's thinking she's alone in this and probably struggling with any other thing, kindly hook up with us and join the group so that you get the social support.
Say the name of the page again.
Adoption is Beautiful Kenya. That is the Facebook page, but then we have a WhatsApp group as well for the support. So don't feel alone out there, and many more parents kindly adopt as many children as possible. It's beautiful. We feel fulfilled as a family.
We want to meet her more one day.
Yes, definitely. If you organize, we will be here with the father.
Yes.
And we will come and bring her more here.
And best of luck to you and to her as you raise her. I just love this. You can't change the whole world, but you can change the world for one little boy or girl. Think about it, consider it. I thank you all so much for what you're doing and for your views. Susan Otome is the CEO of the Little Angels Network. Rosembanya is a family lawyer. And of course, Lynette Guigui, an adoptive parent. That's our time. Thank you for watching Monday Special tonight. I am Anne Kiguta. I will see you Thursday talking politics on Citizen Live at 9 and Opinion Court. But for now, good night. God bless.